Hello. Uh,
Hello.
my name is Baroness Lucia de Enzinas, and I am here to talk about persona research with my good friend Inez. Inez, would you like to introduce yourself with your full name and SCA swoop?
I currently go by the name of Senhora Ines de Freitas. De Freitas is actually a family name. Comes from my background. It mundanely is Guyanese, Guyana in South America. My family heritage is Black, East Indian, and Portuguese, which eventually led to my going to a Portuguese persona, but not initially.
I think a lot of people start their persona journey, because it's a journey, with family names and places, just to learn a little bit about your own backgrounds. Would you recommend that as a place to start, or do you think that's a cop out? Or
It's funny because that's not how I did it. I actually, my going to, I went back and forth with it, I should say. When I started in the SCA, and I started in the SCA back in 1989, long time ago, in a kingdom very, well, not even here yet. Think about it. When I made the decision that I would maintain having a Black persona, which was met with questions, two questions. Questions A, I was told I didn't have to do a Black persona, and to which I responded, yes, I wanted to do one. And B, at the time, there was minimal knowledge of what the expanse of what Black personas could be. The only sort of concept that people had were either to do an African persona or to do a Moorish persona.
right.
And Moorish could mean, as I discovered in my research, Moorish is a very wide term. I mean, even if you look to Shakespeare, when he uses the term Moor, he doesn't always mean a Black person. He could easily be meaning somebody of Semitic descent, an Arab, which is two different things.
Very much so, yes.
Right. So when I started doing my research, I opted for doing a Middle Eastern persona, or at least a Black persona in the Middle East.
Right.
And that came about doing my research on, okay, what is my persona going to be? And I started with a new name. I had the name Ihsan, which is IHSN, which means gift or benefice. So I had that. So I had a name. Okay. And then I had to choose a last name. So since I decided to I wanted to sort of have bearings. So my persona was based out of Basra in Iraq. But since she probably would have been a slave to start, she had to have come from somewhere. So I had her come out of Tanzania in East Africa, Southeast Africa. So the last name I chose was Al-Kilwiya, or Kilwa, which was a small town based on the sort of shoreline of Tanzania. And so that's how that persona started. And also, at the time, mundanely, I was working in libraries, and I happened to find out in my research about Black free women who worked in libraries in Basra in Iraq.
Really?
Yes.
How lovely to find that.
Yes. Well, part of that came about due to, I was taking a course in medieval Middle Eastern studies at the time. And I just happened on that. One of the things you'll find about my persona research, unlike a lot of other people, is mine tends to be very scattershot.
Okay.
So it's not, I specifically tend to just go for one thing and I'm just researching the one thing. I have a tendency to use a, what's the name of that show? Firefly term. I tend to go shiny.
Would you recommend that approach to persona research to others?
Yes and no. I would say that you need to start somewhere, but the whole thing about taking that scattershot approach is that you have to take notes.
So, oh yes, I guess you would, definitely.
Yeah, so you can keep track of what you saw
And where you saw it.
and where you saw it and when, because sometimes things disappear. We are living in the, remember, when I joined the SCA, we didn't have Google.
No,
No, so
back in the dark days.
very dark days. So essentially, I was doing all my research by hand. And as I noted earlier, you know, since we had so minimal knowledge of the SCA, of Black personas, or how to do a Black persona in the SCA, the research was very scant.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So at the time, I had who I dearfully call a cousin, named Lord Fairduff, who was a bassoon player. Some people remember. I think he still appears in the SCA occasionally. But at any rate, Fairduff had already started doing research on doing Black personas. But he was a musician and was busy and was doing other things. So I took the project from him. And remind me to mention this a little later, but I actually, what I did is that I attended the University of Toronto. And at the University of Toronto, they have a library called Robarts Library, otherwise known as Fort Book. This huge mother of a library. And on the 4th floor, they kept the most recent academic journals. And I went from journal A to journal Z, or Z, literally by hand, flipping through each one to see if I could find references to Blacks in medieval and Renaissance Europe and the Middle East. Those are the ones I focused on.
Is it difficult doing that kind of research because of the term Black is just so used in so many different ways and so many different
Still is. It was, and that's why I had to do it by hand, because I couldn't do it by keyword. It was hard to do it. The only way you could do keyword is if you used words like slave. And even then that was sketchy, because you could be talking about African slaves, or you could be talking about Vikings enslaving Irish people and sending them to the Middle East, which they did. Right. I found that out recently, by the way. So you never knew, you know, it was like life is like a box of chocolates. You don't know what you're gonna get. Pretty much when you were looking up Black people, that's the way it was. It's just like you literally had to go through each journal article one at a time.
Is your persona still a slave?
My persona was never a slave.
Oh, I thought that's what you said before.
No. What I meant was that she would have started that way, but could have started that way, but I always lived her as a freed woman.
Okay.
My persona has always been a freed woman.
All right.
No matter what incarnation it was. But getting back to doing the research, I was doing literally opening up a book, seeing if it had anything, If it did, I kept it. If it didn't, over my shoulder it went.
Right, of course.
That took me, the first incarnation of that list took me 3 years to do. Because we're talking thousands of journals.
Right.
And that's just the journals, let alone the books. Right. So that list is still in existence. I have a website, inezdefreitas.wordpress.com, and you can find that list there.
Oh, excellent. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah. So life started with Ehsan Kilouia in Basra. And back in the day, we had an active sort of Middle Eastern community. And when I wasn't doing research, I was performing with drummers as a singer.
Okay.
With the dancers, and all went well. Until somebody who was actually of Arabic descent joined the SCA, a gentleman who went by the name of Jihad. And when Jihad heard my name, he burst out laughing.
Uh-oh.
Because I'd been mispronouncing the name.
And what have you been calling yourself?
I'd been calling myself Ihsan, because just to keep it consistent.
Yeah.
And so when people ask me, I just say, okay, we're just going to say Ihsan. Unfortunately, Ihsan in Arabic translates as horse.
Yeah, that's a problem with non-English sources. Yeah.
And actually, it should have been pronounced Ehsan. And so it was just like, so that was an issue. The other issue was that the Middle Eastern community was starting to die down in Ealdormere.
Right.
So there were few people to play with. And I decided that it might be better to have a European persona. So at that point, I went to Portuguese briefly.
Which isn't English. Like, so you still have the language barrier. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I went to Portuguese briefly, took the name Inez, which has its own challenges because people still mispronounce it.
I am one of them. I'm sorry.
And that's okay. Everybody does. But that's actually period.
Fair.
The spelling of Inez is varied, extremely varied. So I don't worry about it too much. And in fact, in my own family, I have an aunt whose the name is, they pronounce it Inez. So who cares? You know, I will correct you, but in terms of just, again, I go by Inez for consistency's sake.
Yeah.
But I know I'm going to be correcting people all the time, so that's no big deal.
So Inez is the Portuguese name.
Yeah, yeah, or at least a variant of it. It could be Inez, it could be Inez, it could be Inez, it could be there's tons of pronunciations.
Right.
And just as you have Ian and you have John, I mean, it's the same name, it's just variants of the same name.
So does your persona time surf, or do you have a particular time period you'd like to focus on?
When Inez, from the time I changed from Ehsan to Inez, has stayed Inez, I would say since, I think it was 1995, I made the change, and I kept it as Inez since then. The last names and the personas have changed, the time has not. So I have consistently stayed in the 1520s range.
Good time.
The
Lots
time
of trade, lots of
stuff going on.
stuff to, and sources.
Yeah.
English sources.
Well, yes and no.
Okay.
I should point out that I briefly stayed in Portugal, but I was acting as a bard in Ealdormere
Okay.
and discovered that the sources for songs in Portuguese is difficult to speak.
Yes.
Lots of zhuzhes. Which is tricky because actually, if you really want to get technical, even with my name and the variants thereof, it should be Inez. Kind of like, no,
Inez.
Inez, but I'm not going there. We're going to keep it Inez and leave it at that. But I decided that I preferred singing in Italian.
Okay.
So I moved Inez to Venice. So
Okay.
yeah, so I kept her, I still said, if I was asked, I said that I was Portuguese, but I lived in Venice.
Okay.
And the last name, I had a sobriquet, a nickname of Rosanera, or the Black Rose, which I thought would be good for a courtesan persona, which is what I was sort of playing at the time.
Of course, because you're in Venice.
I'm in Venice, you know. And so I did that. And so I played that persona in the SCA until 1999, which was the point where I left the SCA for a number of reasons. There were difficulties that came up, and I will admit, I'm somebody who comes and goes.
Right, shiny. Back to persona stuff.
Yes, please.
Do you incorporate a mental illness into your persona research, or?
I am now, actually. I'm coming up with really
I've
neat.
never heard anybody doing that before.
No, and it's funny. There's certain things I don't do. I don't do garb. I get other people to make my garb. I don't have the patience for garb. I don't cook, but I do have an interest in foodstuffs.
Right.
And foodstuffs, medicine, all of those sort of things. So lately, I've been starting to do some research on physical disabilities, mental health, all of those things, and how people in the Middle Ages and Renaissance, early modern, up to the early modern period, did care, and how people with either physical or mental disabilities survived under those circumstances. And truthfully, from what I've learned so far, and just recently, not much has changed. It's the case of you deal. So if you have somebody in your family with a mental health issue, the family would take care of the individual, or the individual would end up at a hospital, usually involved with the church. So there's a variety of things, but this is new research from Inez. This is stuff that I'm just starting to uncover, and it's really, really cool.
Do you say you don't make garb, but do you research what would have been worn and what not to do?
Yeah, I keep an eye on it. I'm fascinated. This is the one thing I've been fascinated by. Two things, actually. given my hair, because I have very short hair, and I'm intrigued by head coverings for African personas, or Black personas, and hair. Like, how would they do their hair?
Well,
And I've been talking to Mistress Jihad, yeah. She says that, you know, Black women would use pomades and things to do their hair the same way that other white women would in order to process. But I haven't gotten into the details of that yet.
future research.
That's future research. The other thing is that it's funny, I was watching the interview with Duchess Tangwistol, and it occurs to me that I want to put in a little more effort in terms of my own garb. I'm currently wearing my Italian Ren garb, but I'd like to actually have something that is Portuguese eventually. That's a down the road.
Right.
Yeah. But in the meantime, I'm fangirling on Portuguese research.
Very nice. A large Spanish community there, right? Well, influence what you're looking at, or you're just sticking to native Portuguese?
I'm part of, there's a Facebook group that does Iberia. So that covers Portugal and Spain.
Yeah.
There is an academic by the name of Darlene Abreu Ferreira. She's based out of the University of Winnipeg. And she's like my goddess. I love her to death. She has written spans of stuff since back in 2002 to the present day on things like what businesses Portuguese women would have had, what properties they would have owned, whether or not they would be referenced in sources, their names, fishmongers, swearing. Apparently there was this big thing. There was this big thing about, you know, women and being basically verbally obnoxious and
Nice.
so on, and how that they kept records of this stuff.
Makes, forsoothly speaking, a little bit of it more of a challenge.
Well, yeah, but it's fascinating to see. Well, because it was the men writing this stuff, right? And also talking about things like more difficult issues like spousal relations.
Right.
You know, I'm a single person, but I do a lot of reading about marriage and children and how that would work in a household. And I think, you know, when we're talking about playing female persona, one of the things I've noticed about Ealdormere is that Ealdormerian women have this thing about keeping sheep.
We really do, yes.
We do. And eventually, you know, when I'm in one of my more shiny moments, I'd like to take a look a little more closely at some of the earlier period personae and whether we only have to do sheep. like can we broaden this picture?
So something crazy like goats?
Why not? No, and I'm curious about, okay, because when we do persona, a lot of our personae, female personae, we have a tendency to be daughters of, or more often wives of, or widows, which is consistent with the Portuguese stuff, the later period stuff that I do. I see that a lot. But I'm curious about home ownership and trade
guild membership?
Guild membership too, you know, and how that would work. From my perspective as somebody in 16th century Portugal, and in my own research, I've seen a lot of trading in fish, because we're Portuguese. Portuguese do fish, big time. But we also traded in things like textiles.
Well, yeah, of course you would. Even
Yeah.
nowadays, right? Like,
Yeah, but we have documentation of women trading in textiles.
right.
So I know that the Portuguese were trading up with the Dutch and with the English.
Yes, they were.
So
Yeah.
I'm curious as to what the English and the Dutch were trading down.
English wool, I think.
I would think.
It was the biggest export, I think.
Yeah.
But I
So
believe I got that fact from a television show, so it might not be accurate.
yeah, but I think looking at earlier persona, I also would like to see, okay, how much were the women trading in wool? Or were they spinners only? What, I'd like to see what the expanse is. I think it's wider than what we currently do.
Do you think the SCA persona thing is a lot more like what fiction writers go through than what
Not in Ealdormere.
archaeologists do? Or no?
No, not in Ealdormere. Ealdormere, I would argue two things. Ealdormerians are applied scientists.
I would say so.
We do. We do stuff.
Yes.
And from what I've noted this, especially now we're in the midst of the plague, and I've been able to travel virtually, and I'm sort of seeing the cultures of other kingdoms. I would say that Ealdormere sings, as we know. Ealdormere does sing along, in fact, arguably more than anything else. But Ealdormere also is very much applied. It does early period very well, and it does applied early period very well.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Yeah. So so any sort of research it does tends to be on the applied factor and less on the bookkeeping, the book learning that I do.
So how to make soap, not why would I use soap?
Yeah, exactly. And who did I sell the soap to?
Right.
Yeah, you know, that's the difference. That's not a, you know, and it's just an observance that I've noted that that's the way that Ealdormere works. Now that's been changing. I started up a persona Facebook group a couple years ago. Is it Maestra Skaya? I'm
Yes.
not too sure what your title.
Yeah, I think so.
Right.
Baroness Skaya works.
Yes. I one of the things is that I was away from Ealdormere for 20 years. So I've only just come back, right? So right. I'm just getting used to who's who in terms of the titles. But one of the things that we're seeing more of is more persona development.
Yep.
There is a young woman named Margaret Young.
Yeah, no, she's very new. Yeah.
She's very new and she's doing some really cool stuff. She's been doing the Shut Up and Read series.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic.
With Willock.
Yeah.
And which is great fun. If you guys have a chance to sort of want to actually sort of sit and do your research, it's a great way to sort of get together with people, albeit virtually, and do that. It's not a requirement in the SCA. I'm not one of these people who think that people have to be in persona all the time.
No,
But
it'd be difficult unless you had a group of people who are all doing the same time and place.
exactly. And the other thing is that some people can, I'm going to use a term that Baroness Tangwissel used, and I think it's accurate, and that is speaking in I. In that I am so-and-so, I do this, I'm married to so-and-so, I live here. That's a different way to play the game.
Right.
Whereas I'm sort of in the middle. I don't speak in I's so much.
Is that the goal?
It is, I don't know, it's not the goal for everyone. Some people are here to do the applied. I think it's the difference is I am and I do.
Okay.
So, you know, or I take, i.e., I take a stick and hit somebody over the head with it.
Right.
You know, nothing wrong with that. You
No.
have other, I do, I cook, I knit, I sew, as opposed to I am. I am, in my case, I am an innkeeper from 16th century Lisbon who trades in fish.
Okay.
And that's the difference.
Right.
You know, I think also there's an exterior sort of aspect to the SCA, which, as I noted, I don't make garb, really. Maestra Nicola made my first set of garb way back in the day,
Right.
which I wore forever. And I personally don't get into there's a cost.
Yes, there's a cost.
There's a cost. And that I have chosen to invest in books and less in garb.
Right.
You know. So I think that's the thing. And when doing persona, there's those 3 levels of doing persona, which is really cool. And I think what I'd like to see, and I think I've been seeing it, is conversations between the persona. I think that would make research a lot easier. This is something I try to do. If I do a shiny, it's not always for me. So, for example, Joffer did his talk on honey with the cooks yesterday.
Yep.
I happened to see a podcast on period honey, and I instantly sent it to him because I knew that it would be of interest to his research.
Right.
And, you know.
I think that's what the best part about the SCA is that,
yeah.
Like, now I know you're in Portugal. I know what part of Portugal, that you're into fish. Maybe I send you a fish cookbook or something. Or, you know, I found this piece of art that was done by a Spanish painter or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And this is why at one point I was on one of the Facebook groups, and I asked people who they were. And that was a rabbit hole. That was 200 people.
Oh, I remember that thread. Yeah.
That thread went on forever. But it was fabulous because I don't think any of us really knew who we were. And one of the things I should actually do as I think on it is I need to go back to that thread and pull out the data. We have a mass of data in that thread that, statistically, I think would be of use for us when we're looking at the development of the kingdom as a whole.
Oh, maybe, for sure.
I mean, because that was a lot. I did a rough count. I think there was like 200 people who answered that thread.
Something like that, yeah, for sure.
And when you consider how many people we have active in the kingdom, that was what? Do you have any idea how many we have?
About 500, I think, members.
Yeah, so that was half of the kingdom answering that thread.
That's nice that so many people do have an interest in persona. Like, that's
And in a variety of ways, because like it's not my sort of drive to have people have an in-depth understanding of what their persona is. There's nothing wrong with saying my name is so and so and I live in so and so and I brew mead.
right.
That's fine. You know. Nice to know that you brew mead because I happen to like mead.
And if I was to do a scroll for you, I'd put bees on it. And
yes, exactly. Exactly.
And yeah, so it's nice to be able to personalize gifts because we have quite a large gift giving culture in Ealdormere.
Yes, true enough.
Nice to have used persona have the makers use the personas as a jumping point for making too.
True enough. True enough.
Do you think you'll ever compile your whole persona in like I don't know, like in one spot, like in a binder, or as is it possible to have a persona research presented in arts and science competition format sometime?
Well, I already have my I have a webpage specifically for her and her work. So all the research and stuff that I do is on the website. So in terms of one of the things I'm doing in terms of my research is I'm interested in women in economics. That if I wanted to hone it down, that's my thing. What did we own?
Right.
And when, and how much control did we have over the stuff, and how much did we have to pay in tax, and things like licenses. We don't think about these things. If you wanted to make candlesticks in Portugal in period, you had to have a license for it.
That's crazy. Yeah.
Well, you had to have a license for any of these sort of things. Just as like if you were running a tavern, you had to have a license to do that.
Yeah.
Right. So, so I take a wider approach. I actually look at the entire Mediterranean. But but in terms of doing it as an ANS, I think I don't want to reduce my ANSs to essays.
No.
So I'm trying to come up with a creative way of doing the ANS so it's not just an essay.
I've heard someone was working on a dollhouse.
That's a way to do it. So to do a diorama thing.
Right.
Yeah, that's an idea. I in all my years of being associated with the SCA, technically I've only been in for 10. Technically, but realistically, I've always been an Ealdormerean. I've been an Ealdormerean since 1989.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in all those years, I never did an ANS. I've judged ANSs.
Of course, yeah.
But I've never actually participated in them. But one of the things that I've been I've heard from speaking to others is, since we've gone kingdom, I like that the ANS is a learning opportunity.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's, from what I understand, it's far more of a learning opportunity than it is a, a who managed to win the prize. Winning the prize is cool, but I think I like the idea of the discussions.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So in the future, I personally would, if we've got people who are writing the essays, I'm happy to read them. Happy, happy, joy, joy. I can happily read on anything, because you never know when somebody's research will lead me to say, well, such and such, I know such and such is also doing research on this stuff.
Right. So persona research is more networking too, like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a networking thing.
Is it easier to do the persona work when you have a large community all interested in, say, like the Middle Eastern community you said was there when you first started in the Ealdormere, or is it you get to be more specific and possibly more accurate on your own?
That's a hard one. I'm not sure. It could work. Personally, I think it could work either way. Because again, I know that's, well, I know I can be a bit overwhelming in terms of saying, here, look at this neat stuff.
Shiny.
It's shiny. And I should point out to people that while I have a tendency to read like a lot of the academic type stuff, I'm very picky about which academics I read.
Well, yeah, you'd have to.
Well, and when I say that, I'm meaning that you have some people who write in terms of their academic environment, and it's not as accessible to the rank and file.
For sure, yeah.
Whereas, like, if I can read Darlene Abreu Ferreira's stuff, it's totally clear. She writes clear notes. So it's like reading it's like being able to go to Chapters and just buy a book on the Middle Ages.
Right.
If I can pick an academic who can write that way, I'm happier. And that's the sort of stuff that I'm going to pass on to others, as opposed to, let's say, an academic who is an archaeologist who tends to speak in archaeology speak.
Right.
Which would be a little daunting for some people.
For sure, yeah. That, I mean, they get trained on how to speak that way.
Yeah, exactly. And they have the other thing is watching for things like people who, let's say they do Roman persona and will reference stuff in Latin, but not give you translation.
Right.
That's not useful.
No.
Yeah. So I wouldn't pass on something like that to people. Or at least I would, but I would give them the warning that, there's tracks in here that you may have to get a translation in, or you may have to talk to this Scadian who happens to be able to read and write in Latin.
What has been so no person comes to you and they want to develop their persona. Where's the first place you'd send them? Would it be something as simple as Wikipedia as a jumping point, or do you have like the journal of what's it like? Where would you send a new person?
This may sound, it's funny considering my own antipathy to making garb, but I would tell them to start looking pictures of what they want to wear.
Oh, for sure, absolutely, yeah.
Because there's no point. I'd start there. The next thing, once you've sort of figured out what you want to wear, the children's books have gotten a lot better.
They really have, absolutely have.
So, again, it may sound odd to do in terms of research, but the children's book, the advantage of a lot of these children's books is that the pictures are bigger.
Very
So
clear. Yeah.
they're very clear. And so when you're making garb, it is far easier with a child's book to see the details than oftentimes an actual like text, bigger, an adult text.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Because
So
an adult text might be 500 pages on a pinky ring, where this is traditional outfit would be in the children's book for sure.
yeah. So, and it's funny, I remember visiting, there was a canton being developed in Goderich. And it's funny, I was asked at the time, so this was back in the late 90s, I visited Goderich and they said, well, we don't have anything in our library. And I said, and I was just like, take me to your library. And I literally walked through the library. The first thing I did is I walked through the library and started at 001 in the Dewey system and walked all the way through to 999.99 and threw books over my shoulder.
Right.
Because a lot of times when we start in the library, we say, I want a book on the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
And that's, that's a bit broad.
A bit broad.
It's a bit broad. And so that's the first thing I did. The second thing I did after I went through myself, I went to the librarian or the person on staff. They're not all librarians, by the by. And I said, I have this group, they're doing the Middle Ages and Renaissance period, which of course broadens it or, brings it, gives us more stuff. And then I found out that again, there's no Google at the time.
Right.
But I was brought to their computer database. Goderich's database back in the 90s didn't just cover the one library that it had. It covered the school library. It covered the library for the local, I think, 2 churches that they had there. Like there was a whole mass of stuff that you could get access to. Fast forward to 2020, I live in Toronto, which means that I have access to university libraries and so on. Mm-hmm. But our public library has a heap load of stuff that you can get online.
Yeah, for sure. It's amazing what you can download now.
Yeah, it's insane. I no longer need to have a university library card.
No.
Everything I need, I can go to my public library card and get easily. So to come back to your question about starting persona, mm-hmm. I think networking is also a good thing.
For sure.
Talking to other Scadians who are doing persona, and now we're living in the age of COVID. We have literally the world.
Yeah, for sure. I think, going up to someone says, you look very pretty. What is your persona? What are you wearing? It's always a good icebreaker, especially here.
Yeah, or you're wearing, you've built this trebuchet. Tell me about that. You've cooked this. Tell me about that.
Sure. You can add the pieces to your persona.
Oh yeah. And now we also live in a wider world within what the SCA covers. We are no longer just based in what we modern day call Europe proper.
Right. It's really, I think, made the SCA more interesting.
Yeah.
For sure. Well, I think that's an hour. I think that we covered a lot of ground.
Yes, we did.
Is there anything else you want to make sure that you've covered before we call it quits?
I think I would say I would remind people to talk to people, find out what they're about, and shiny is a good word.
Shiny indeed, for sure. Thank you, Inez, or Inez.
Yes, you got it. You got it.
It was lovely to chat with you.
It was a pleasure to speak to you. Thank
Right.
you very much.